How did a simple janitor, who never earned more than $100 a week, manage to leave behind a fortune of $8 million? In a world obsessed with getting rich quick, he found a different way, a path hidden in our minds, not in our bank accounts. What you're about to hear is not just a success story. It is a fundamental law of the psychology of money, and it's available to anyone who is willing to wait. There is a question worth asking. When you see a man step out of a Bentley, what is your first thought? Rich, successful, made it. But here is what you are actually witnessing. Someone who spent $200,000. The car is evidence of money leaving their possession, not staying in it. We confuse the performance of wealth with wealth itself. We see the costume and assume we have seen the person. But wealth, real wealth, does not arrive in a convertible. It does not wear a Rolex. It does not post from a villa in Santorini. Wealth is silent. Wealth is the choice not made, the car not bought, the vacation not taken, the ego not fed. And if you spend your entire life chasing the symbols of success, you will miss the substance entirely. This is the story of two men. One who understood this, and one who did not. One died with $8 million and a safety pin holding his coat together. The other died bankrupt, in a mansion he could no longer afford. Their names were Ronald Read and Richard Fuscone. And their lives contain the entire moral architecture of Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Money. Ronald Read was born in rural Vermont in 1921. He grew up during the Great Depression. He never went to college. For most of his adult life, he worked two jobs, a janitor at a department store and a part-time attendant at a gas station. He swept floors, he pumped gas. He lived in a small house. He drove a second-hand car until the wheels nearly fell off. His friends said he wore the same coat for decades. When it ripped, he fixed it with a safety pin. Not because he had to, because he chose to. He did not eat at fancy restaurants. He did not travel to Europe. He did not subscribe to the belief that life owed him anything other than the chance to show up and keep going. And every month, quietly, he bought stocks. Blue chip companies, boring ones, the kind that pay dividends and do not make headlines. He bought them and then he held them. For 40 years, 50 years, 60 years. He never sold in a panic. He never chased the hot stock. He never tried to time the market. He simply waited. And while he waited, something extraordinary happened. Compounding went to work. Morgan Housel writes that compounding is not intuitive. It does not feel like magic when it is happening. For the first 10 years, it looks like almost nothing. For the first 20, it looks modest. But if you give it 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, it does not just add up, it explodes. Ronald Read's portfolio grew, slowly at first, then faster, then exponentially. By the time he died in 2014, at the age of 92, he was worth over $8 million. He left $6 million to the local hospital, $1.2 million to the local library. His family had no idea. His neighbors had no idea. The man who fixed his car had no idea. Because Ronald Read never performed wealth, he lived it. In silence, in discipline, in a refusal to let the world dictate what enough looked like. Housel argues that this is not a story about intelligence. Ronald Read never took a finance course. He never read the Wall Street Journal. He probably could not explain the capital asset pricing model or modern portfolio theory. But he understood something deeper. He understood that wealth is not about what you know. It is about how long you can wait without flinching. Compounding does not reward the smartest person in the room. It rewards the person still sitting in the room, decades later. Think about that for a moment, not the person who knows the most, not the person with the best strategy, but the person who simply refuses to leave. That was Ronald Read, a man who understood that patience is not passive. Patience is the most active thing you can do when the world is screaming at you to react. Now let us turn to Richard Foucault. Harvard-educated, Merrill Lynch executive, a man who understood finance at the highest levels. By his early 40s, he had already made enough money to retire. He lived in Greenwich, Connecticut, one of the wealthiest towns in America. He borrowed millions of dollars to build a mansion, 18,000 square feet. Indoor basketball court, elevators, a personal library that could have held every book Ronald Read ever checked out. He had the pedigree, he had the knowledge, he had the access. But he had something else too, ego, and an inability to define the word enough. Housel explains that getting rich and staying rich require opposite skills. Getting rich requires optimism, risk-taking, confidence. You have to believe that you can win when others think you cannot. But staying rich, that requires humility, paranoia, the constant awareness that the market does not care about your credentials. Richard Foucault borrowed heavily. He assumed his income would continue rising. He assumed the market would keep climbing. He assumed that because he had made it once, he could not fall. And then 2008 arrived. The financial crisis did not ask for his resume. It did not care that he went to Harvard. It did not pause because he had once been important. The debt that built his empire crushed him. His home went into foreclosure. He filed for bankruptcy. Everything gone. Think about the contrast for a moment. A janitor with no formal education dies with $8 million. A Harvard-trained Wall Street executive dies broke. Same economy, same stock market, same country, same era. The only difference, behavior. Ronald Read could say enough. Richard Foucault could not. Ronald Read could wait. Richard Foucault could not sit still. Ronald Read had no ego to protect. Richard Foucault had a mansion to fill. And that is the entire thesis of Morgan Housel's book. Doing well with money has little to do with how smart you are, and everything to do with how you behave. Housel opens his book with a chapter called "No One's Crazy." And the premise is simple: everyone makes sense to themselves. Your financial decisions are shaped by the world you grew up in. If you came of age during the Great Depression, you learned that the market could disappear overnight, so you never trust it fully. If you came of age during the dot-com boom, you learned that markets only go up, so you take bigger risks. If you grew up poor, every dollar feels like survival. If you grew up wealthy, money feels like a tool. Neither is crazy, both are rational, within the framework of lived experience. Ronald Read grew up during the Depression. He watched entire fortunes evaporate. He learned early that security was not guaranteed. So he built his life around one principle: survive. Do not gamble, do not borrow. Do not assume tomorrow will be kind. Richard Foucault grew up in a different world, a world where Wall Street was king, a world where leverage meant opportunity, a world where bigger was always better. His rationality was shaped by abundance, and abundance makes people reckless. Housel writes that we judge others by their results, but we judge ourselves by our intentions. We see someone struggling financially and think they must be bad with money. But we never stop to ask what world shaped them, what trauma, what lessons, what invisible forces made their version of rational different from ours. This is not a book about right and wrong. It is a book about context. And context is everything. There is another chapter that deserves attention: luck and risk. Housel argues that these are two sides of the same coin, and most people ignore both. When someone succeeds, we call it skill. When someone fails, we call it stupidity. But the truth is messier. Bill Gates went to one of the only high schools in the world with a computer terminal in 1968. One of the only schools in the entire world. Was he talented? Absolutely. Did he work harder than most people could imagine? Without question. But he also got lucky. He was born in the right year, to the right parents, in the right neighborhood, with access to the right school. And luck is not a small variable, it is a massive one. Now flip it. For every Bill Gates who got lucky, there were equally smart, equally hardworking people who were born in a different zip code, who did not have access, who faced obstacles that had nothing to do with talent. Risk is the same. You can make every right decision and still lose. You can be prudent, disciplined, and strategic, and a recession can wipe you out. Or a health crisis, or a policy change, or a random accident. Ronald Read got lucky. He lived to 92. That gave him 70 years of compounding. If he had died at 50, his strategy would have been the same, but the outcome would have been ordinary. Richard Fuscone got unlucky. His timing was catastrophic. He borrowed at the peak. The market collapsed. If the same decisions had been made 5 years earlier, he might have survived, but he did not. Housel's point is not that luck and risk excuse everything. It is that they humble everything. You cannot judge someone's wealth as proof of brilliance, or their poverty as proof of failure. Because you do not know the full story, and neither do they. This realization should make us kinder to others and to ourselves. Let me ask you something. When was the last time someone impressed you by not buying something? Probably never. Because restraint is invisible. We do not celebrate the person who drove the same car for 15 years. We celebrate the person who just bought a Tesla. We do not admire the family that skipped the vacation to max out their retirement accounts. We admire the Instagram post from the Maldives. Housel writes that wealth is what you do not see. It is the income not spent, the bonus saved, the raise that did not become a bigger house. Wealth is invisible, by definition, because the moment it becomes visible, it is no longer wealth, it is consumption. And consumption is the enemy of compounding. Ronald Read wore a coat with a safety pin. He did not do this because he loved suffering. He did it because he understood that every dollar spent on appearance was a dollar that could not compound. He chose future optionality over present performance. And that is the hardest choice a human being can make. Because we are wired for status. We are wired to signal success. We are wired to prove to the world that we have made it. But proving you have made it often prevents you from actually making it. The hedonic treadmill never stops. The raise becomes the new baseline. The promotion funds the bigger house. The bigger house demands the nicer car. And suddenly you are running faster, just to stay in the same emotional place. Housel does not argue for misery. He argues for awareness. Know what enough means, write it down, and when you hit it, stop moving the goalpost. Because the goalpost will move forever if you let it. The question is not whether you can afford something. The question is whether buying it brings you closer to freedom or further from it. So what is the point of money? Morgan Housel argues it is not luxury. It is not status. It is not even security. It is freedom. The freedom to wake up and say, I do not have to do anything I do not want to do today. The freedom to walk away from a toxic job. The freedom to say no. The freedom to spend time with people you love. the freedom to think and create and rest. That is wealth. Ronald Read had it. He never made headlines, he never built an empire, but he lived on his own terms. He answered to no one. He worked because he chose to. He saved because it gave him peace. And when he died, he left a legacy that will outlive most fortunes. Richard Fuscone had everything except freedom. He had the mansion, but he was a prisoner to the debt. He had the title, but he was a prisoner to the ego. He had the resume, but he could not stop performing long enough to ask, what am I actually building? And that is the tragedy, not that he lost money, but that he never figured out what the money was for. There is a scene I want you to imagine. Ronald Read in his 80s, sitting in his small kitchen, a cup of coffee, the morning paper, sunlight coming through a window that has not been replaced in 40 years. He is not thinking about his portfolio. He is not checking stock prices. He is simply present. Because he has nothing to prove, nothing to protect, no image to maintain. He is free. Now imagine Richard Fuscone in that same moment, in his mansion, surrounded by things that cost a fortune, but gave him nothing. The basketball court he never used, the elevator that reminded him daily of his own excess, the library filled with books he never had time to read. He is not free, he is performing, even in his own home, especially in his own home. And the difference between those two mornings is the difference between wealth and the appearance of wealth. Morgan Housel's book is not a manual, it is a mirror. It asks you to examine not what you know about money, but who you are when money is involved. Are you Ronald Read, patient, humble, content with enough? Or are you Richard Fuscone, brilliant, accomplished, but unable to stop climbing a ladder that leads nowhere? The choice is yours, but the lesson is the same. Behavior beats intelligence, time beats timing, and freedom beats everything. This is not about denying yourself joy. It is about knowing the difference between joy and performance. It is about building a life that does not require an audience to feel valuable. It is about understanding that the richest person in the room is often the quietest. Ronald Read never wrote a book. He never gave a TED Talk. He never shared his strategy on social media. He simply lived, and in living quietly, deliberately, patiently, he became wealthier than most people who spend their entire lives chasing wealth. That is the psychology of money. Not the math, not the strategy, not the hot stock tip. The psychology, the behavior, the relationship between who you are and what you do with what you have. And if you can master that, you do not need anything else.